Today we're discussing transforming the B2B buying experience. Our facilitator is Kevin Asher, a sales and marketing expert with over 20 years of experience in leading high-performing teams. He helps companies win by modernizing their sales force with technology and technique to become more awesome. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks, Gene. Great to be here.
So this theme, number 11, what's left to learn about sales? What are we going to learn today?
Well, first, let me just give a quick recap and the reason why what's left to learn about sales. With this panel, we've talked about things such as authenticity, onboarding, new reps, metrics, analytics, best practices, how to handle meetings, emerging trends. We've covered a lot. So to me, it seemed the obvious next question is, what's left to learn? What's still uncovered, and what are the biggest needs, either new or emerging, that the sales profession needs to tackle?
All right, well, I'm interested. Talk about the panel that participated in this conversation.
Exciting to have a truly global panel, well represented by industry, by geography, by buyers, sellers, pretty well gender balanced. Lot of diverse thoughts, and it's been one of the most engaged and lively panel rosters that we've had in the several months that I've been leading the group.
So, Kevin, as we look at the executive summary here, it looks like there is indeed room for improvement, and you have 4 key points you're going to get into today. What are they?
Well, we're going to talk a bit about humans. We're going to talk a bit about computers. And basically, it's going to be the combination of two. So on the human side, we're going to talk about emotional intelligence. One thing we won't get into is whether or not computers will be able to eventually achieve their own emotional intelligence. But right now, there's what we're referring to as artificial intelligence, and specifically how that's applying to and rapidly changing the sales profession. None of this matters if prospects aren't in the position or of a mindset to buy. So we're going to talk about prospect intent, and we're going to talk about the latest themes and trends in company-wide alignment to make the sales part of the organization as successful as possible.
I look forward to this. So in key point number 1, you talk about the emotional intelligence or soft skills, if you will. Is that something that can be trained or improved, or is this something you're born with?
Absolutely believe that is a learnable skill. Because think about it, and Famita uses the reference about children. Well, there are lots of things that are noble to emulate about our childhood before we grow prejudices and start having self-critical talk that limits our own abilities. But on the other hand, think about how we acted as children and how we act as now. Just as you go through life, your emotional intelligence naturally increases as you interact with more people throughout your life and you see the results of those interactions. And I'd say with most learnable skills, it all starts with awareness. If you're just aware of what's happening and how what's happening connects to the outcomes, you can be better about changing it. So for instance, Michael has a very clear, succinct piece of advice. If you stop viewing your job is to sell your client on something and change that to help them just be a better buyer of your product, meaning how are they going to get the most use out of it? Is this really the right thing that they should be buying right now? Emotional intelligence, the biggest part of that is empathy. And empathy doesn't have to be a touchy-feely, squishy word. It really just means viewing the world from the way that your prospect, your client is viewing it. And the more that you understand what they're going to care about, the more that you could help make the connection to what your product and service will do to help them achieve their goals. That's what emotional intelligence is all about. And so ultimately, as we move into artificial intelligence and these other technology improved tactics, it still ultimately is down to we have to be more human. And that's what emotional intelligence is all about.
Well, you did bring up artificial intelligence. So what role is it playing currently, and where do you see it in the future?
Artificial intelligence is probably one of the most bandied about terms and can often be one of the most misunderstood terms, and it certainly can be quite a threatening term. So Lots of companies are referring to where we live right now as the fourth industrial revolution. First one was a steam engine. The first was mass production. Second was steam engines. Third was internet and rise of connected technology. And some are saying that now this rise of cheap computing power, more advanced methodologies, and distributed information is leading to this world of artificial intelligence and machine learning. What that really means is that we're able to take more data and make sense of it in a better way than we ever were before. And so the way that it applies to sales is, on the one hand, it provides more, when used correctly, it provides more information about what's working, what's not working, where are buyers most successful, where are they challenged, where are we as sellers more successful, challenged. Ultimately, the whole goal of using artificial intelligence is spending our time most effectively on the activities that matter most in growing profitable, successful, strong client relationships.
So do you see AI coming from more of a training perspective or more from a prospecting perspective?
I see it as both, because Loop has to conclude with information going back to the sales rep of how they can be better. So let's even just take a quick example of how it's being used in the world of sports. For anybody who watched the recent World Series, there were plugs and product placements for Amazon Web Services talking about how they're immediately able to analyze the speed that the ball is leaving the bat for a home run, immediately understand the percentage of hits by placement on the field, and all these other stats that can help the defense shift alignment, help the pitcher with pitch selection. And so that's an example of where huge amounts of information are being processed automatically because the AI is analyzing the video and coming up with these stats, and it comes back to being actionable by the defense on where to position themselves, what pitch, whether, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's an example of it helps both managers by determining rosters, and then helps the players ultimately execute on the mission that they have, which in the defense is obviously to prevent runs.
You know, it's interesting you're talking about that, because in key point number 3, you talk about kind of none of that matters if you're not following and being able to identify the prospect's intent. You know, what does this mean? Is this looking for the buying signal and whether or not they're ready to buy? Walk us through this a bit more.
Yes, so this covers both a lot of what happens before you even say hello, literally or figuratively through email or a phone call or an in-person visit. So think about our consumer expectations. If we call into a company, let's say our cell phone company, we expect them to know who we are, know what our plan is. We expect service to reflect what the company should already know about us. And B2B buyers are no different. In fact, their expectations are probably even higher because they're managing budgets orders of magnitude bigger than a consumer budget. And so understanding intent is, what do we know about this prospect before we even ever talk to them? Do we know if they've had management changes? Do we know if they're rapidly growing their office footprint, hiring, the technology that they use on the website? There is more information available now about your prospects than ever before. And so starting a phone call with, "Hi, Mr. Prospect, what keeps you up at night?" is a surefire way to frustrate your clients and get an early hang-up. And so it's not just, are they potentially in market? Do we understand what pain points they potentially have? And all that is what we're referring to as buyer intent. And then obviously when you're down at the one-to-one conversation level, you're in person, you're over the phone, and then you're reading signals and you're understanding whether or not they're really interested, understanding whether they have purchasing authority, what their buying process and decision criteria are. But ultimately, it's before we even pick up the phone and contact this person, have we earned the right to contact and interrupt their day, because we have more than a reasonable chance or more than a reasonable suspicion that they could benefit from what we have to offer. That's what understanding prospect intent is all about.
And then in key point number 4, you talk about kind of, I guess, company-wide alignment, or some people might call it the culture of the company. Elaborate on this.
Yes, so our panelists recognize that over the last several years, there's been a lot of progress made in aligning sales and marketing, which makes sense. They're both primarily the customer-facing parts of the overall company. But what the panelists are talking about is what needs to happen next. The next phase of alignment is the entire company being in sync behind the sales team. There's still a lot of stigma and stereotypes between sales and the rest of an organization, whether it's a product-led organization, engineering-led, sales-led. But ultimately, that is self-limiting. If the company doesn't operate with the understanding that nothing that the company does matters unless the sales function monetizes that work in that effort. And the best-led organizations are the ones where, as Akshay and Paul are mentioning, is where it starts at the top and the entire company is behind and contributes to the sales effort. And that's what the panelists are referring to and eager to see around company-wide alignment, particularly around larger size companies.
Well, it sounds like the panel had a really dynamic conversation. Talk about these three experts that stood out.
Yeah, so Famita, Joanna, and Steve have been frequent contributors, and they had a lot to say, particularly about AI and particularly about the emotional intelligence. Famita is very strong in her work with her clients about increasing emotional intelligence, so it doesn't surprise me that the algorithm and the scoring put her top on the list because she had a lot of great contributions on the emotional intelligence front.
Great. So, gosh, this is so fascinating, Kevin. Really great job on this. This was theme 11 in our series. Do you have theme 12 coming up? And if so, what is it going to be about?
Theme 12, we're going to dive deeper into CRM, customer relationship management. Because we talked a bit on this panel about the role that technology will play, and the core piece of technology that every sales team interacts with, or every sales team that hopes to make the use of technology, they're going to start with their CRM system. So we're going to cover attitudes towards where it works, where it doesn't, limitations. Because if a company doesn't have a good relationship with its CRM, it's going to be at a big disadvantage of taking advantage of all the new trends and emerging capabilities that AI and other technologies have to offer.
What a great panel, Kevin. Thank you so much. Kevin Asher, a sales and marketing expert with over 20 years of experience in leading high-performance teams. He helps companies win by modernizing their sales force with technology and techniques to become more awesome. And Kevin, we will talk again.